Good morning. I'm Olivia Holas for Boca Magazine, and it's time for a coffee break with our friends at Jed Lawyers. We are joined by managing partner Marius Jed and J. Albert Johnson, senior trial counselor, who has an impressive list of high-profile, nationally recognized cases. So it's so great to see you, gentlemen, this morning. It's been a while, so welcome back.
Great to be here, Olivia. It's been a long time, too long, and always great to see you, my friend.
Likewise, likewise. So today we're going to talk about the tragic condo collapse, that happened in Surfside, Miami on June 24th. I don't even really know where to begin because it really is a massive tragedy. So, Marty, this residential condo building was built in 1981. So in this case, who is deemed responsible? Is it the engineers, the builders, the HOA? I mean, who's responsible for this?
So that question we can probably stand here for an hour and talk about, but I'm gonna summarize what I understand, and I'm gonna ask my partner Al to also chime into this issue. What we do know is that there actually has been a judge appointed to these cases, which is pretty interesting, in Miami-Dade, who is trying to find rapid resolution for these horrific injuries and the death of all these people, as well as the people who lost their property. There is de minimis insurance that's available. As a matter of fact, the current property insurer of the building has already or is in the process of tendering their policy limits. And I understand they're in the range of $40 to $50 million of insurance, which is a tenth or not less than a tenth of what this will cost to, number one, replace the structure, and then number two, to fairly compensate the people who lost loved ones and had tragedies. But as it goes with defendants and potential defendants, one of the main defendants will be the board of directors that manage that condo. And I think from what I've read, they have what's called directors and officers insurance, and they have already, the insurance company that protects them has already or is in the process of tendering those policies. And that policy is not nearly enough. There are statute of limitations and statutes of repose that protect the builders and the architects that are been over 40 years ago. So it's going to be hard to point the blame on them. But I know there's a lot of good lawyers involved in this. And what I also find very interesting and kind of unique, and I think the judge is doing the right thing, since there's limited funds, and from what I've read and everyone that I've spoken to, this is should be over $1 billion loss, where if you were dealing with the proper insurance or a wealthy defendant, you would have that availability. But the judge in this situation has rightfully, or in his opinion at least, is not allowing plaintiff's attorney to recover a fee. So all the lawyers that get involved are doing it pro bono, which I think is a very altruistic way to handle this. And there's some really darn good lawyers involved in this as well. And what I understand, they're working pro bono, so it will make sure that the victims who lost their loved ones and the victims who lost their property are potentially compensated as much as can be. And Al, I know you have a tremendous amount of information. Maybe you can also add to that as well.
Well, we at Jed Lawyers have to look at it from a lawyer's perspective, obviously. I'm a trial lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for over 50 years, but I've been involved in condominium law. I've been involved in HOA law, homeowners association law, for most of that 50 years. So I think rather than concentrate on what has happened in that terrible circumstance on Surfside, I think we ought to talk about what people should do. 30 million Americans live in condominiums. 30 million. That's a lot. And it may even be greater than that. That's the latest figures that I have. Many of them live right here in Florida, obviously with the coastline of Florida just flooded with condominiums. And so the question, I think, that's of most interest to our viewers is, what should people do who live in condos? What do they do? Well, number one, we ought to think about Inspections, inspections, inspections. Really, really important. Second, reserves, reserves, reserves. And number three, legal representation in the event of a disaster. Those three things are the most important things that condominium dwellers should look at. First, when the developer, when the builder of the condominium turns it over to the condominium board of directors, initially, those directors have an absolute obligation to conduct their own independent structural engineering study. It's really, really important. And it's got to be a really exhaustive and not so cheap, but expensive study to determine whether or not the building which is being turned over to them as ownership is really structurally sound. And they may find, as they often do, that is new structural engineers, that the building doesn't meet the structural qualities that it should. So what do? The incoming board of directors, the new condominium owners, wait, they don't take title. Not until the structural engineers who they have hired certify that the building is in 100% shape, that all the rebar, all the concrete, everything else is in 100% shape. So once that is done, once the initial inspection is done by structural engineers, then the next step is to go into business with the condominium owners and the boards of directors as they change from year to year and conduct more inspections. So I said when we began, inspections, inspections, inspections. I have been a board member and legal counsel for over 3,000 condominiums in my lifetime, over 50 years, and boards of directors of homeowner associations. And I can tell you, the most aggravating thing is to see unit owners, condominium owners, who refuse to pay up for structural engineering studies during the time that they own their condos. They don't want to pay it. And the one problem that I have had over the years as a director and as president of over 3,000 units over the years is to convince the unit owners that they ought to pay up every year, big time, for structural engineering inspections. Really, really, really important. Now, once that's done, once the engineering studies have been done each year on at least a yearly basis, then the next thing that has to be done is to establish reserves. Nobody wants to establish reserves. Every condominium owner I've ever heard of squawks like hell about providing money on a regular basis in addition to their condo fees, in addition to their condo maintenance fees for statutory reserves. They don't want to do it. Really important. If that had been done at Surfside, from what I've read, the problems might well have been avoided. The understanding that I had was that there was $15 million, which was estimated by structural engineers, which needed to be done right away. There was no money to do it with. So what they had to do was they had to assess each condominium owner an amount to equal that 15 million bucks. People couldn't afford it. It varied from $300,000 for penthouse apartments to $80,000 to $90,000 for lesser value apartments in Surfside. Well, people who are paying on a regular basis, people who are living in condos on a regular basis, just don't have that money to all of a sudden put up for a reserve fund to do or to correct deficiencies. So you got to do it routinely. You got to do it every single year. You got to inspect the reserves. Now, how do you do it? There are people out there who do nothing else but conduct reserve studies. You got to employ one of these people to come in, look at your building with the structural engineering people, and determine what reserves are necessary in the event of a disaster. and that's got to be done. I used to do it every 6 months. The condominium owners who I represented as an officer squawked like hell. They just didn't want to pay it because the emergency wasn't there. Well, of course it isn't until it happens. And Surfside shows exactly what can happen, notwithstanding the terrible loss of life. Look at what happened to the building, demolished. So, number one, inspections. Initial inspections when the condominium owners take over from the developer, really important. Number two, frequent inspections. I used to order a structural inspection every 6 months. It used to really, really irritate people, but I knew how important it was that it be done in order to prevent something like this from happening. So, frequent structural engineering inspections. And third, but certainly not least, is to have an association with attorneys who can move in the event of a disaster, in the event of structural difficulties which occur. We at Jed Lawyers have a division which does nothing but disaster recovery. We moved into New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy and provided the impetus necessary to cause the insurance companies to pay just value for the premises which were ruined by Hurricane Sandy, by Superstorm Sandy. We do that all over the country, and we're prepared to do that here. Now, what does that mean? It means that the condominium association associates itself with lawyers such as Jed Lawyers, and I dare to say we're the best in the business, and associates themselves with lawyers ahead of time and make sure that those lawyers are ready, able, and prepared to move in the event of a structural deficiency and recover the amounts that are due from insurance companies, which brings up another subject, insurance. There isn't enough money, as Marty pointed out, to pay for the damages and the loss of life at Surfside. And there isn't enough money around. You couldn't buy that kind of insurance if you tried. But you have to buy as much as you possibly can. And I tell every single condominium owner, I tell every single condominium board of directors that I speak to on a regular basis. I was the president of the Boca Raton Highland Beach Condominium Association for many years. 61 condominiums, over 10,000 people. And I told them on a regular basis, look, let us come in, let us look at your structural inspections, and let us be ready when and if it is necessary to go after the insurance companies to provide for the recovery necessary. Now, insurance companies are not in business, they're certainly not in business to do favors for their insurers. They're in business to make money for their insurance companies, for their stockholders. So we know as trial lawyers who face insurance companies every day to recover for people who have losses, we know they never pay full losses. They just never do. They try every way they can to avoid payment of just losses. That's why it's important that every single condominium have lawyers ready, willing, and able to move in the event of a disaster so that the available insurance, whatever it might be, is paid out as soon, as quickly, and in such amounts as provide recompense for the damages which occur to the condominium. Now, how do you do that as far as insurance is concerned? You buy the most you possibly can without being ridiculous, but you buy amounts of insurance which the structural engineers tell you would be necessary in the event that you had a loss. It can be a lot of money, and it can cost a lot of money in insurance monies, and it of course is assessed directly to the condominium owners. They squawk again. They don't want it. They don't want too much insurance. Well, it takes something like Surfside to energize these people and to make them understand, hey, we better have enough insurance. If we ever have a loss, no matter how great it is, we better be ready with lawyers who are experienced enough to go after the insurance companies and to provide those monies necessary to to repair the premises so they can be lived in. That's what we do on a regular basis at Jed Lawyers. We do it not only in Florida, but in other states where we move in the event of a disaster, a hurricane, a superstorm, and so forth, fires and so forth, to recover monies which are rightly due from insurance companies. We do that. Anyway, I think I've set out maybe a little bit too verbose, but set out a little bit the most important things. One, inspections, inspections, inspections. Can't do too many. Structural engineering inspections. Reserves. You have to impose reserve funds sufficiently from the condominium owners on a regular basis. On a yearly basis, you have to reset these condominium funds, reserve funds, so that you have enough money around to pay for the insurance, pay for the damages, and so forth that might occur as they did in Surfside. And third, you got to associate yourself with disaster recovery attorneys. There are many of them around who deal with insurance companies every day. We happen to be the best. I don't know of any other law firm that does the amount of disaster recovery work that we do, but we do it on a regular basis, representing condominiums and homeowners, homeowner insurance companies. So I think that sums it up. Inspections, reserve, and law firms.
Well, and Al, I mean, it's so elaborate and you're always so detailed and just full of knowledge. But, to go back to the Surfside example, my understanding is that in 2018, the issue of some structural problems was brought on to the condo board. And then my understanding from reading articles is that also earlier this year, as early as April, just 2 months before this tragic thing happened, again, there was an alarm that was rang, and I understand that there wasn't enough, funds to go in and fix the issue. But in that instance, I mean, what else could they have done to avoid this tragedy?
They could have done exactly what I said a little while ago. They could have done it on a regular basis since the first time the condominium owners took over from the developer. It's got to be done routinely. Yeah. It's got to be done every year at the very least, at the annual meeting of the board of directors of the condominium owners, which is required by law, by the way. At that annual meeting, there ought to be a specific time set forth. First, to examine the structural reports which are gained during the year from structural engineers, and secondly, to set up reserves payable then over the years, payable each year by the condominium owners, which very few do.
Right.
And something I want to.
And that's my question exactly, is that I understand you have to have reserve funds, but people are going to complain, people are going to forget, and they're going to get back to their ways of, oh, we don't want to pay this. So is there an alternative? Is there, there is.
There is. The condo board can assess.
Move out. If they won't do that, if they will not, if I lived in a condominium, as I did here in Boca Raton for 14 years, beautiful condominium on the shore, right? Beautiful. If I lived in that condominium and they refused to address, one, frequent structural inspections, and two, the imposition of monies to be paid regularly into reserve funding, I would have moved out.
Also, I want to add to that, Olivia, the board and the condo association has the right to assess payments to the unit owners, and as well has the right to foreclose if they don't pay those assessments, depending on the condo docs, which will obviously lay out the rights and responsibilities. But look, no one wants to assess their friends who are their neighbors for paying more money, but the boards have a fiduciary duty to really make sure that that is done. And that's the key word, is fiduciary duty. And as Al said, if these people, if they had put reserves together to make sure they did these structural examinations, and if people didn't pay it, they would foreclose on their units and they would be out. Also, something that's additional that I also recommend, when you live in a condominium, which the condominium really covers the four walls and out. You can also buy your own personal policy. So people in those units had bought their own condo, it's called the condo policy, that would protect them for the loss of their personal items, their contents, the structure itself. However, obviously that wouldn't protect them for loss of a loved one. But still, I mean, you're talking $300,000, $500,000, $1 million units that if they didn't have private insurance, condominium insurance, those people are never going to collect a dime because there's not enough money. So that's another thing they can buy is their personal insurance within the condo for their own units.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't, based on what Marty said, I don't think any condominium owner should live in a condominium unless they have their own property damage insurance policy, homeowners insurance policy for that condominium. That protects them in the condominium for the personal property and the property which is declared to be owned by the condominium owner. What we're talking about with Surfside and in general is the payment of monies by insurance for common areas in the condominium, which was of course the direct result of a structural failure in Surfside. So both of those insurance matters are important. The individual ought to positively have homeowner insurance for the condominium itself, but the building itself must have sufficient reserves to pay for insurance in as greater amount as is possible based upon the structural engineering studies. Those things are going to tell you how much you're going to need in the event that you have a disaster. And that's what you're going to base your insurance upon.
And I think you're going to see this year when we get back into the legislature, I think you're going to see a lot of changes, whether it's building codes, whether it's minimum requirements the condos have to comply with. The law, the legislature 100% is going to address this because
I can tell you right here in Boca Raton, Olivia, right here in Boca Raton, Mayor Scott Singer has already moved forward and has already said the city of Boca Raton is going to study immediately what the city can do as far as forcing condominiums to provide sufficient reserve funds and statutory inspections of all of the condominiums here in Boca Raton. The first city to do it in Boca Raton through the insight of our Mayor Scott Singer.
this should not happen in America.
And that's exactly, Marty, what I was going to say. I think the most important thing is that this does not happen again, and there's no amount that can, help with the loss of a loved one. So
let's put it directly. If those people in Surfside, those condominium owners, had paid regularly for structural engineering studies and had paid regularly into reserve fundings to repair what the structural engineering deficiencies showed, this thing would never have happened.
And Marty, do you think that, with this type of tragic event, that there is going to be a lot of condo residents that are going to want to move out and, kind of leave condominium living? And also, in terms of, being part of an HOA, already that's a big responsibility that you're taking on. I don't think a lot of people realize as HOA members that they do have a fiduciary responsibility. So how do you think this is really going to kind of change the environment?
So I think initially people were very concerned right after this. Some of my friends are realtors, a lot of my friends are realtors. And there was a hesitancy to go into a condo, and especially an older condo, which Boca Raton, on the Palmetto area and north over there, a lot of those condominiums are 30, 40 years old. And I do think there's going to be initial, pullback on the market. But then I think there's going to be, look, this is South Florida. There's still 1,000, 1,500 people moving here. And a lot of people like that condominium lifestyle. If it's for you, it's good. So I do think you're going to see a resurgence in the demand, but initially I think people are very concerned, the buyers really, and sellers. What are they selling? How good are the units they're in? Are the values going to be affected? Because this may be their largest asset that they own. And I do think there's a short-term pullback on the value of some of these condos. And then I think the newer buildings are going to provide benefits, right? Because they're structurally more sound. The technology and the rebar is different. You don't have as much spalling where the rebar gets affected by the salt air, and it's just the technology is different. So a 40-year-old building versus a brand new building in Miami, I'd prefer to have a brand new building in Miami.
Yeah, one thing that Marty mentioned, which is important, is the duties of the boards of directors and the officers of the corporation, of the condominium. Really, really important. You know, it used to be, everybody used to think that, you know, it was a real honor to be able to serve as an officer or director of a condominium association or an HOA, homeowner association. Not true anymore.
No way. I wouldn't do it.
Because I've done it all my life. All my life I've done it. Over 50 years of life, I've been involved in condominium as an officer or director. And I can tell you, it becomes very difficult. People like to throw rocks at the directors and at the officers of the corporation. However, I gotta tell you, Marty hit it right on the head. Those officers owe a direct fiduciary duty toward every single condominium owner in their buildings. And they've got to act in the best interest. Now, you know, many of the condominium directors are guys who have been, women who have been successful in business, and they think they know everything. So they substitute their judgment for the judgment of the entire condominium, whatever they think is right, and they don't listen to others. They don't listen to structural engineers. They don't listen to lawyers like us who talk about what can happen in the event of a disaster. So you got a real problem. Number one, you have to get the very, very best you can to serve as officers or directors, number one. And number two, you have to convince them at the meetings, which nobody attend, by the way, you have to convince them that they have to operate in the best interest of every single condominium owner by providing the inspections, by providing the reserve funding, and by providing the relationship with lawyers necessary to conduct the proper business of the association.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a lot of condo boards and HOAs really need board training from experts like you, because this is clearly a very important job. So,
Florida law, by the way, Florida law provides now, there's a statute which now provides for training for condominium directors and HOA directors. It's required, but it's very, very thin in detail.
Well, hopefully we'll see more of that. And, you know, thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge. It's always so interesting chatting with the two of you. On a lighter note, a lot of kids are back at school. So for a lot of us, summer is over as parents. But what is your favorite summer memory, whether it's from your childhood or this year, Marty?
So my favorite summer memory is the Jersey Shore. Spending my childhood in Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey, and being able to share that experience with my kids who lived it here this summer.
That's great. And Al, what about you?
Well, I go back a long ways, of course. My favorite summer menu of recollections is being able to work a part-time job in the area that I was in and produce some money so I could have some money during the school year. So a little bit different than the recollections of kids nowadays. Mine was a little bit different. By the way, I just want to mention, Olivia,
yes.
Back on the serious side, just for a second, I wanted to mention that we at Jed Lawyers are ready, willing, and able to go into condominiums to advise them as to what they ought to do. We're ready to do that at no charge, ready to go in and talk to the condominium owners or the associations and see if we can influence them as far as their inspections and reporting is concerned. We're ready, willing, and able to do that. Happy to do it.
what an amazing resource. And I think they should all take you up on that offer. So thank you so much, gentlemen. Always great seeing you. And I'm wishing you a wonderful weekend.
Great seeing you, Olivia.
Thank you,
Thank
Olivia.
you to our viewers for joining us as always. We appreciate you and we look forward to next time. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.